Hello and welcome. I'm Robbie,
And I'm Jay.
and you're joining us for episode 24 of Generations Apart, the show where we chat about gaming and technology across the generations, sharing our perspectives on the past and our excitement for the future. On today's episode, we're talking about the world of Android tablets. Apple has dominated the space for years with their iPads, but we're taking a closer look at the true competitors in this space. Before we get into that, though, we're bringing back piqued interest. So, Jay, what's piqued your interest this week?
Good question. So this week it was an announcement from Sony that they are bringing their motion capture technology called, I'm going to call it Mocopi, to the US. So not fantastically useful for us here in the UK, but I suspect if it's coming to the US, it'll eventually come here. So what is Mocopi? So I think you've got it on screen, which is great. The article here from The Verge. Basically, it's an affordable, we'll call it, although still not cheap, an affordable motion tracking setup.
Mm-hmm.
And it's primarily being targeted at VTubers.
Yeah.
If you don't know what a VTuber is, it's a virtual YouTuber, essentially, someone who uses an avatar to represent themselves on their streams. So rather than you seeing the human being, you might see an anime character or an animal, something like that. And often they're like dancing or motion-based streams, so lots of physical movement involved, and the characters kind of mapped to that. So these devices have been tested out in Japan, which is where I think VTubing, if that's the right word, is at its most popular. And it's now coming to the US. They're available for pre-order, and they're in the region of around $450, which may sound like a lot for what are effectively, I think, 6 of these little motion capture devices and accompanying straps. But relative to the more premium tools that are currently available, it's actually really quite affordable. And if you're looking to get into that motion capture setup, this could be the device for you. So I thought it was really interesting. It uses these motion capture tools and your phone, basically. So it's not big in terms of hardware demand. There are mixed reviews of them on YouTube at the moment. There's quite a few popular VTubers and virtual reality YouTubers in general who are messing around with them, not just dedicated VTubers. But I thought they were really cool. I thought what a really interesting, I guess, area of technological focus in terms of motion tracking and low budget motion tracking.
Yeah.
But I thought how fascinating that could be for people who are kind of getting into movie making or content creation that want to bring motion capture, maybe some CGI into whatever they're doing. So, it's just, again, making this kind of this technology that's typically reserved for Hollywood or big budget film studios, and it's bringing it to, your everyday home user for an affordable price. A few $100s really to get this kind of setup is quite powerful.
Yeah, it's really cool technology. I can't say I've ever watched any VTuber streams or any VTuber videos. Have you watched any of those?
I haven't, but it does make me wonder whether we should do an episode as VTubers.
That would be amazing, but maybe
Just
using AI
switch
avatars.
Ourselves out for avatars, yeah.
I like that. It's also got, this technology could be used for a bunch of different things, right? So, you theoretically, you've mentioned CGI and stuff like that. It reminds me actually a few episodes ago where we did you had a peaked interest, which was like the AI mapping of like aliens or funny characters on top of videos.
Yeah.
Using stuff like this.
What that product's called. Interestingly, while you're on the subject, that particular tool has now been released for purchase. It's a subscription model. It's actually quite pricey per month if you just want to dabble with it. But if you're into that space and you're making content, then I think actually for the £20-30 a month it's actually quite affordable. It's a bit outside of the thresholds of what I'm prepared to pay just to find out what it's like, though. So
yeah,
I can imagine they released that. They released that last week.
There'll be like semi-professional videographers will be using that. I'd have thought it felt like more of a pro tool because it did look really quite professional, the output. But you can imagine something like this being really useful for that. But also, I was just thinking, we talk a lot about the metaverse and VR generally. You'd have thought technology like this would be something that could be replicated in a bit better, at least in the metaverse. You were going to have, body tracking stuff, whether you could do, I don't know,
Yeah.
better
I think it
games or better
absolutely can be.
interactions, gestures, using your hands quite a lot if you're speaking to people and stuff like that.
Well, there's already quite pricey hardware and software that's doing this. So, and I imagine people are already using that where they've got that kind of investment and that setup to make a really immersive VR experience. So, yeah, absolutely. And I watched a video earlier, actually, of a popular VR YouTuber, and he was talking about these and reviewing them. And he said, actually, with the included software and out the box, they're okay, but they're not brilliant. And then he started to compare them to some of the other solutions on the market. But he said actually where they came into their own was there were some homebrew tools that you can use to make these Mocopi, or whatever they're called, these devices work with a more popular emotion tracking tool called Slime VR.
Okay.
And you could actually couple more than 6 together with this technology. You could use them to create more articulation points. And he said that was where the application for these potentially was really solid, because they're portable, they're small, they're easy to use, they're affordable, and coupled with better software, although it had to be done through Linux at the moment, they were actually a more compelling purchase in that space. But beyond my capabilities to set anything like that up. So, although I would like to give these a go, I would like to try it out.
You trying to say Linux isn't a good software platform to do this on, Jay?
I'm trying to say I have no idea what I'm doing when it comes to anything that isn't out the box and install me with click of a button. So
it's the direct opposite.
Simply saying I'm not effective in that space. Not dissing Linux.
Yeah, nice.
Don't you start.
I know. No, the Android hate again.
We're about to spend an episode on Android, and
you're
trying to tee me up already for comments and abuse.
Absolutely, absolutely.
What about you, Robbie? What piqued your interest?
Well, for me today,
all I can see in our show notes is a YouTube link, which has me intrigued.
Yeah, I'm gonna say. So it's a quick one, and I know we did our last episode on WWDC, and there was a few things that I think came out but perhaps weren't announced properly. And there was a great video by MacAddress, Jonathan at MacAddress, dove into a few of the extra things that were announced at WWDC, or perhaps not announced but released under the radar. And one of the things that he mentioned in the beginning of his video, which I think is a really cool safety feature that I'm struggling to think how they're actually able to do it, but Apple are going to implement a blurring or a prohibitive feature on any nudes that you possibly sent. So it can tell what is nudes that you're sent, and it blurs them and warns the user before they open it. And so this is Jonathan in the videos is going around and interviewing people about, if they'd ever been sent that before, and would this feature be useful for them? And yeah, it's something that's coming in. That's an example of the feature there, just on screen if you're watching. Yeah. And you can either accept or decline that particular image, I guess.
But I'm just assuming it's just image recognition, isn't it? Again, much like they trained your phone to recognize cats and dogs, I suppose they've also trained it to recognize other things. Yeah. Let's keep it family friendly, but other objects that might be sent to you via picture.
Yeah,
that's clever though. That is really clever. But I think there was already a similar implementation of that kind of tech in the photo library, which would effectively, I think, restrict certain types of pictures or fish certain types of pictures out of your photo library, in order to protect like kids on your account and stuff like that. So I don't know whether that's using presumably similar image recognition tech. That's really clever.
Interesting. See, I didn't know they did that already. It's quite impressive. And they mentioned that they've got this child-friendly feature that if you've set up an iPad for a child, you can even, parents can prohibit even further and add like warnings and things like that. And it's quite cute actually. And here it gives an option for message a grown-up. And if you can see that in the video there. So there's multiple warnings that come up to protect children even further than the normal users. So,
that's really good.
Great
and
features.
I have to say, as a dad with 2 children who have tablets and one who has a phone now, the family controls are really useful. So, we've got things set up to restrict screen time on certain types of apps. So you can create kind of blanket policies for the whole family. You can restrict certain children in certain ways. You can restrict what kind of apps they can freely download or otherwise. You can make them ask for permission on everything, or you can give them some degree of freedom based on the age ratings of certain apps. And that's been really powerful, actually, and really helpful for us, especially with the kids. We set limits on things like YouTube Kids, just to stop them from getting lost in hours and hours and hours of content. And when the limit comes up, we can choose if we want to extend it, but more often than not, we don't. We just kind of say, well, that's your time on YouTube up. Go and do something else. Put that tablet down, go and play with some toys, do some artwork. Or, we're a bit less strict with things like Netflix or Disney Plus. We don't mind them going there and spending a little bit more time. We just don't. We would find it a slightly easier way to police things like YouTube by simply restricting the amount of it they can have access to.
Yeah. Cool.
Which seems a strange thing to say as we talk about a show that we post on YouTube, because
what's the limit? Is it an hour, or should be able to watch our show?
An hour for both of them. Yeah. I don't think we appear in the YouTube Kids app, funnily enough.
Oh, a shame.
I do choose the option not safe for kids when I upload this.
That's a fair point, actually.
We drop an F-bomb or something.
Fair point.
Not that we do very often, but better safe than sorry.
Definitely. Cool. Well, that was my piqued interest.
Fantastic.
I thought, a couple of extra, and that video, I'll link it in the show notes. There's a couple of extra things that were, a bit under the radar, announced at Apple's WWDC. So things like being able to clean up your inbox. It can recognize OTPs, for example, the one-time passcodes that you get over email, and automatically file them and delete them and stuff after an extended period of time.
I did see something today, actually, again, that to do with unreleased functionality, which was one around being able to clone your voice in 15 minutes.
Yeah, he mentioned this in the video as well, which is really impressive.
That looks really interesting. I was going to make that my piqued interest, actually, but I decided against it this week.
It works really quickly as well, and he does it. He replicates his voice and starts speaking with people about it. But it's an accessibility feature for people who may end up losing their voice, so they can record their voice properly and use that to do text to speech using their voice, so they can speak to people in their own voice, which I think is a really cool
fantastic
feature.
Isn't it? It's really good, really good.
Yeah. There you go. So I'll link that in the show notes. It's a great video, just summarizing some of the extra cool features. But today's topic, we're going to be chatting. So I think the format of this, we're going to go through very quickly some of the pros and cons of the traditional pros and cons, I guess, of iPads versus Android tablets. So starting with iPads, I both, for disclosure, I think we should say that we've both got iPads. I don't know if you've had any experience with Android tablets in the past.
No, to be quite honest. I mean, I've sort of may have fleetingly handled one or seen some of the cheaper kids kind of iPad alternatives that friends and families have got, but no, I've not sort of had any extended exposure to them.
Yeah. So I used to have and I'm sure we've mentioned on this one of our earlier episodes, it was called an Acer Transformer, and it was really ahead of its time. It was like 2013. It was a converter tablet / laptop. So you slot it into a keyboard that was like a proper hard bottom keyboard. And when it was all together, it looked just like a normal laptop, a bit smaller, quite heavy, but it was just like a normal laptop. And that was actually like an Android tablet that you clicked into a keyboard. So my main experience with Android has been through something like that, which actually at the time was quite a high-end product, with the best Android software you could get for tablets at the time. Fast forward 10 years, and that feels weird to say. There's been a lot more development. I know. A lot more development in the Android tablet space. The software's gotten much better. I think the biggest issue back then was that there were so many apps that were available on Android but not optimized for the tablet size screen. But so much of that has come a long way. There's things like multitasking now as well. There's really robust features in there, definitely to rival iPads. So I thought it was an interesting comparison to bring today. And we've got a bunch of recently released Android tablets that we can chat through as well a bit later after we've gone through some of the more pros and cons section. So,
sounds good.
iPad. Tell me why you like your iPad, Jay. What's your pro?
Oh, I mean, God, there's many, aren't there? But I've had iPads ever since iPads existed. I don't change them that often because I tend to find, unlike my phone, they seem to, for my use at least, they go a little bit longer.
Yeah.
The battery life seems to be better. I don't use them as heavily, so they're probably not getting pummeled in quite the same way that the phone is. But I've had a few now, I guess, over the years, and at no point have I thought about changing from that ecosystem.
Yeah.
To me, when I compare it to other tablets I've experienced, I think the biggest thing that I notice when I come back to the iPad is the fluid, responsive nature of the screen, the touch screen, the software, the interface. I often find that the cheaper tablets, and I haven't tried any of the high-end alternatives, I should say, so only tends to have handled things like the Amazon Fire tablet or whatever. It's that sort of input, the lag, the visual fidelity on the screen. So those are the things I most immediately notice. I guess the biggest and most obvious answer for me, though, is that I am well and truly entrenched in the Apple ecosystem. So the kind of seamless nature by which all of my apps work is really the thing that I enjoy most about them. I can pick my iPad up, I can pick up a message, send a response, put it down, move rooms, pick the phone up. I've had a response, I'll answer it, put it back down, go to my Mac. Do you know what I mean? That for me is what is the most compelling reason to sort of stay with the iPad. However, I'm looking forward to you trying to convince me otherwise on this episode.
It might be a losing battle now how deeply entrenched you are in the Apple ecosystem. And I suppose that's one of the main pros I've got on the list is the Apple ecosystem is, if you're in the Apple ecosystem, it's a fairly obvious choice to get an iPad just because it works so well with your other devices. And there's a few different options for a few different kind of price points. I wouldn't say it can compete with like the cheapest end of the Android tablet world, but certainly it's not ridiculous money to get started in an iPad these days. If you're already in that ecosystem, often it's just an obvious choice. What I will say is that I think, and we'll talk about it a bit later with the main competitor, but Samsung also have a great ecosystem with theirs that they're trying to replicate like a similar style with Apple. So again, it's one of those obvious choices that if you've got Samsung phone, Samsung Watch, Samsung Buds, all of the other things that are in that ecosystem, again, it's an obvious choice. So ecosystem can have a massive play, I think, in what tablet you end up using.
I think that as well, there's probably people who listen to us talk about the Apple ecosystem, and like you've just made the point, they're probably screaming at their screens going, but my device has its own ecosystem. I have this kind of all-encompassing world, and I get that. And I'm certainly not saying that Apple is the only company that has this kind of ecosystem, this attractive ecosystem. It's the one I'm in. It's the one I understand. And I also know that often a lot of the functionality that makes its way to Apple isn't an original concept. It's often taken from somewhere else. Maybe it's improved. I might argue it's done better, but it's usually come from somewhere else. So I will completely acknowledge that. The reason I'm calling the ecosystem out is because that is the one I'm in, and it makes sense to stay in that. That's appealing to me. Kind of cross functionality between my devices is what I want. And what they're doing.
Yeah. I think you touched on one of the other pros that I had in my list as well, which is just the reliability of the software, which is often fast and smooth generally, even over long periods of time. So Apple do have a good track record of providing like software updates for many years after your purchase, whereas that can be a bit hit and miss in the Android world, definitely depending on which manufacturer you go with. So it's definitely got that in the pro camp, is the reliability over the long term, definitely.
They've also been fairly consistent with their devices now for quite a long time. So, there have been small changes to form factor, but nothing radical. The screen ratio has remained the same, I think, ever since the first iPad. They might be bigger and more of them now, and they might have square flat edges rather than beveled edges, a home button, no home button. But ultimately, software that's designed for your iPad is going to work across almost all the iPads, unless it's power hungry. And we are now seeing that move to the Pro sphere, and we've seen our first Pro tools, which are now exclusive for the Pro range. In Final Cut and Logic. But generally speaking, as you say, you can pick up an iPad. You know exactly how to use it and where to find things, and all iPads look and feel the same. I find that because there's such a variety, a bit like Windows, and laptops, etc. Because they come in so many different shapes, sizes, and flavors, sometimes it can be quite hard, even if it's an operating system you're used to pick it up and get going, because it's been customized, bespoke. Something about it has been changed by the manufacturer, or the ratio is different. Things don't look and work the same. They introduce gimmicky features that restrict its interoperability. So it's boring, some people might describe the iPad space in that respect, but I think that consistency makes it easier to continue to work with. And you can build a workflow with those products, and it's going to work when you get to the next one. You don't have to worry about rebuilding, redesigning how you work.
Well, it's interesting you describe that as a pro. I would probably describe that as a bit of a con, just because there is limited choice compared to the Android space. And I know we've had this debate a bunch of times about a bunch of different things, PC gaming and PC versus Mac and all that. The customizability and the choice that you get in the Android world is completely different to the Apple world. So again, it's similar to the phones. They're targeting people who can just pick it up and use it, and not have to worry about diving too much into gimmicky features or customizing it. But there is a lot of really interesting formats of tablet in the Android space. One of which we'll touch on later, which I think is quite an exciting new way of doing it. And I can see later down the line something like Apple would pick it up as well. But we'll touch on that.
I think this speaks to the differences between the way you and I interact with technology, and almost perhaps the kind of work or roles that we undertake in our daily lives. For me, ease of use, consistency, simplicity, efficiency of a process is very much what draws me in. And I don't necessarily like the variety. I like to go ideally for the best experience that I think is the best, or I've decided is the best for the reasons that I would justify. Most often that's ease of use, reliability, seamless kind of interactions between hardware or platforms. And I'm not saying that you don't like all those things, but I think you've got a more curious mind, and you like variety, you like that choice, you like the more obscure hardware designs, and you're prepared to jump in when others or me might go, I want it to be proven. It's not a risk aversion point. It's more about worrying with the disruption that it might cause. Whereas, you've shown in the last 12 months, you've pivoted from Android to Apple in many of your products. That's not a simple move. For most people, that's quite a daunting change. It could be frustrating. You know how to do it. You're a seasoned pro at this, but that it shouldn't be underestimated, the upheaval of going from one ecosystem to another. And a lot of people wouldn't want that. And I would put myself in that bucket now. I just could not be bothered with that change. So my weddedness to Apple is it's not completely blind love or faith in the Apple brand. I do very much think Apple make great products from a design point of view. It's also my aversion to that kind of hassle. Just can't be bothered. And it's the same reason I prefer console over PC. I like to plug it in, put the disc in, and it just works. I don't want to have to mess around with it, even though I acknowledge that if you're prepared to mess around and you're prepared to go down the route of PC and invest in that hardware, you can probably get a better experience. And I'd make no bones about that. I choose convenience.
Yeah. That's fair enough. And that makes sense. And I was kind of expecting that, us on the opposite side of the camps, even though I do have an iPad. I suppose the other con that we've touched on a little bit perhaps is the expense. And Apple notoriously have very expensive products, which means there's a bit of a barrier for entry for a lot of people in choosing iPads. But that's across all their product lines. My mum was actually recently looking for a phone. She's on the Android world, and we looked at what you can get for her budget in the Android space versus the Apple space. And she was looking at getting a Google Pixel 7a, which is, a relatively recently released phone. Quite good support, good cameras, good technology. And comparatively, it was the iPhone 11 that was in her budget, which came out 2019. I think that was what was within her budget for that. So it's like,
yeah, I mean, there's no counter argument for that, is there? I mean, I do think Apple have done a good job of bringing some lower end, lower price devices to the market to make them more accessible, but they still don't stack up.
No.
If you're looking at Apple from the Android side of the fence, it's expensive. If you're looking at, so when I look at the iPads, for example, the newer entry level iPads, knowing what I've spent on the iPad Pro, I look at the lower end iPads and think that's pretty reasonable. That's not bad,
Comparatively, yeah.
Yeah, and when I'm looking at the kids, I mean, to be fair, the kids, my daughter's got her own iPad, and that was a birthday present from the whole family, but my son's just inherited one of our older ones, and that's fine. But if I was going to look to get them new ones, I would probably go for that ecosystem and spend the extra money because of all the value we articulated earlier, actually around, parental controls and privacy, etc.
Yeah.
Rather than spend less and go and buy a non-Apple device, because honestly, the friction point for me as well is less. I can just open this up. I know what to do, set it up and hand it off. If I bought an Android tablet and saved a few £100, I'd have to fumble around trying to work out how to use it.
Yeah.
I just can't be bothered.
Yeah. There is an awful lot of choice. I mean, you can pick up a Android tablet for like £100 these days. If not cheaper. The kids ones, dedicated kids ones, I think can be less than £100 in the Android space. So,
wow,
yeah, cool. Well, I think let's see if I touched on all the pros and cons of Android. I think, to be honest, because a lot of the pros in the iPad space were the cons in the Android space, and vice versa. The only thing
you didn't call out the no calculator app on the iPad, which I did when I read your notes. I was blown away that was the second and only other con. In the list was no calculator.
Well, it's a representative point. So the calculator app, there isn't a dedicated calculator app on the iPad, which is weird. And it's not, I mean, it sounds like I'm really nitpicky, but for the longest time, they didn't have a dedicated weather app as well. And they've got this weird thing, Apple, and again, it's a very Apple thing, they'll only release apps to their iPad when they can do it the Apple way. And I remember seeing a long time ago, Marques Brownlee interviewed Craig at Apple and asked specifically about the calculator app. And it's like, yeah, we worked on it a bunch of different ways. We just couldn't get it to work the way, we wanted it to work, having a calculator on an iPad. And it's like, it's just a calculator app. Like,
yeah. Well, it's weird because it used to be,
thing,
I don't know if it still is, but it used to be a widget on the MacBook that you could add into the notification bar, and that was actually quite convenient, and it's been on iPhone forever.
Yeah.
And it's part of the notification center for sort of speed of access. I would have thought now with the new Stage Manager functionality that you could have had a nice
obvious
kind
choice.
of compact calculator, that just you tuck in the corner while you're doing your work. So
bizarre.
I mean, I do think that's weird. I agree with you.
It reminds me of the resistance to adding multi-timers to their timer app as well. Like every other timer app has had that. And then they announced it at WWDC and made like some kind of self-aware joke about how, we truly live in a time of wonders, being able to set multiple timers at once. It's just Apple weirdness, I think, is
and they'll
the
do
point
that. They will drop a calculator app at some point, and you'll get just a sarcastic launch.
Yeah, it'll be spectacular, I'm sure, as well. But
I don't really know how Spectacular can make a calculator.
That's why I'm like, is it worth holding out this long?
Does it need? Yeah, like just
to make
give us the bog standard one that you've got on the iPhone, which in itself is, most people don't know when you turn your phone into landscape that you get a scientific calculator, which most people don't even know exists. So why not just give us that on the iPad?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Weird. Not the purpose of this conversation.
No, that
It'll be
was
an
our little
interesting
rant.
title for an episode: debating the calculator on iPad.
Yeah.
We are
When will they
absolutely our
make a
lowest
full hour
performing
episode?
episode.
Full hour episode on the calculator. Anyway, yeah. So that's essentially the pros and cons. I don't think I've missed anything from my list. Apart
they're
from
very high level, but they make sense.
fairly high level. The only other thing I would add is, and again, it's an Apple ecosystem thing. There is tons and tons more apps that you can get on Android. Again, not all of them will be amazing. Not all of them will be good because they're not vetted nearly as much as they are on Apple. But there's just lots more third-party options for apps on the Android space.
There was one thing that we talked about that I've just noticed we've glossed over, and I think it's worth calling out. And this I think affects iPhones similarly. Is when it comes to third-party accessories, physical accessories, not necessarily digital. Because of the consistency and popularity of Apple's devices, you tend to find third parties will make more choice, more devices, or they'll focus on Apple's products first, and then they might adapt their product to another ecosystem. And because, as you mentioned, there are lots of different flavors that the Android devices come in, whether that's manufacturer or even just directly from Google and sizes and formats. The impression I get, at least, and I don't shop around for non-Apple accessories, is that there's a little more choice or creativity in the accessories that are available to Apple users, purely based on the fact that their devices are more popular. And I guess the assumption is there's perhaps more spending appetite or disposable income or whatever might come along with someone who owns a premium device versus someone looking for affordability. So I don't know if that's a thing or not, but that's
it is worth calling
of mine.
out. It is worth calling out because I think that could have an impact on the overall price. If you look at an iPad, and there's tons of third-party accessories like cases and stuff like that, or keyboards that you want to attach to it. There are lots of third-party options. They love making third-party options for that because it's much more of a popular product than any of the it's a sea of products that they could potentially make accessories for in the Android space, where you rightly pointed out it's very consistent in the Apple world. There is more third-party choice, which tends to make some of the accessories cheaper than perhaps you might find in the Android space. Now, that's not always the case, but cases and keyboards.
I mean, there are some horrifically expensive accessories made for Apple devices. Again, I think preying on people with more money than sense.
Especially if you buy, but that's not third-party. That's the Apple.
Some of them are.
Really?
There are some ridiculous. Have you not seen the what's the brand? Someone's done they've released a concept of what their Apple Vision Pro customizable accessories will look like, and I don't know, it was Hermes, and it was like gaudy and gold and ridiculous, but it was £35,000 or something stupid was the price quoted for these accessories, which is madness, isn't it? But I think it's the attachment rate, isn't it? If they're looking at sales, the problem with the Android market is a bit like the Windows users versus Apple, is that the hardware split is so varied because you're not just looking at the latest iPhone or an older phone. You're looking at Android as a software on OnePlus. You've got Google, you've got Samsung, you've listed here, and others. So
no spoilers, Jay. Jeez.
Just brands, but that it's much more split, isn't it? It's much more varied in terms of manufacturers, and therefore, even if Android is, I don't know what the numbers are and the sales split is, you've then got to break down the Android adoption rate based on the different possible device types and manufacturers, and there isn't a huge amount of consistency between what their devices look like because, of course, they're all vying for your wallet, and they want features that bring you to them over the other.
Yeah.
So I guess that also makes things a bit tricky. Although obviously Samsung, as you said, have kind of positioned themselves as the premium Android brand.
Yes, they are the.
Which is weird when you think that it's Google's product.
And the software is.
That's what I mean. The software is theirs, but they
make
are
the
not
tablet.
The premium manufacturer.
Oh no, yeah, that is a good point. Google never really positioned themselves as the flagship manufacturer.
No, and I say it's odd. I suppose it's not, because equally Microsoft don't try to position themselves as the premium hardware creator for Windows.
Yeah.
They do a line of hardware, but the premium stuff belongs in other manufacturers, doesn't it? Who do the top end stuff. So it's not unusual, I suppose. It just feels odd when you think that the company who makes the software aren't the best or most, or at least premium when it comes to the hardware that goes with it.
True. Very true.
Anyway.
Cool. So that's the pros and cons. I was going to touch on a couple of the competitors, the main competitors in this space. And I'm going to start with OnePlus. Have you heard of this tablet?
No.
So this one, it was actually
I've heard of OnePlus. I just haven't heard of the tablet. I thought they just did phones.
Yeah, so OnePlus, the phone manufacturer. And this, you might see actually a theme in the ones I've selected. They seem to be perhaps a bit, because they're more competitive iPads, they seem, they are mobile manufacturers as well, which I think might be a coincidence just because, or maybe not a coincidence because it's the ecosystem again. So I imagine there's some features that work well across OnePlus phones to OnePlus Pad. You see what they did there? But yeah, so it's the mobile phone manufacturer. So their history in mobile phone manufacturing as well is more budget-friendly phones with semi-premium features. They were kind of middle of the range, like I think $500, $600 phones that had really good specs and competed with some of the more expensive phones that didn't perhaps need to be you didn't need to spend that much money on. So they've got a good reputation in the tech space, basically, is what I'm saying. Mostly in the mobile space. I think this is their first tablet. But this one in particular, it did come up on several review podcasts and videos I watched, saying that it's very similar to an iPad. It's clear that they have been heavily influenced by Apple's choices of style, design, software, and accessories. So
you've only got to scroll through the web page, as I've just been doing, and the visual style and similarities to Apple's own website and the way it displays its products is uncanny.
Yes. To be fair, though, I mean, a lot of technology suppliers have adopted a very similar style of site.
I'm sure someone would sit here and go, "Oh, Apple didn't do it first, so and so did." But as to your point, accessories, the OnePlus magnetic keyboard that's towards the bottom of the page.
Yeah.
There does seem to be, I suppose you've got to, haven't you? If you're trying to draw people away from the iPad, you've got to show them something that feels comparable and slick and attractive. And what I will say is, I scrolled up and down while you were talking then. I hit buy now, and I was pleasantly surprised by the price that I saw. I was half expecting this to be at least a few £100 more expensive than it actually is.
Yeah. So do you want to tell them the price?
So it was $449.
That's right.
Advertised.
That's right.
Weirdly, at least the link you provided, unless there are others, that gives you the choice of color and configuration in terms of RAM and storage, but there is no choice. It's literally green and 8 gig of RAM with 128 gig of storage, but the way it's laid out suggests I should have more choice.
Yes.
Which is a bit weird.
Maybe in other regions there's more choice. Or maybe they're gearing up for a special edition or something.
It might be their website is geared this way for products, and the OnePlus phone comes with more configurations, and therefore the way their e-commerce site happens to present it might just do that as well. But who knows?
Yeah.
But yeah,
good price.
Decent price. I mean, I've got no idea how that hardware sort of compares to the similarly priced iPads. I know what my iPad's got, but my iPad is not that price. So.
Well, we can talk about the screen in terms of technology. So the screen is a 2800 by 2000, which I think is on par, with the iPad Pro. Don't quote me on that one, but I think that's up in the I think that's up in the 4K range, and it's got 144 hertz refresh rate, which is more than the iPad. I know that much. iPad
2800 by 2000 is not 4K.
Is it?
No, can't be.
No,
4K,
sorry, right.
4K is 4 times HD, isn't it?
Oh, I'm gonna have
and
to look
HD's
it up
1920 by 1080. So That's 2K.
Yeah, you know what? I've got the Apple website up. Yeah, I knew I couldn't get anything past you, Jay, in terms of criticizing the
display. Hey, I'm on board. I said it was good price.
I think maybe it's not on par with the Pro, but probably the Air or some of the
but you
lower
wouldn't
iPads.
expect it to be at a fraction of the price. Yeah,
but it does have a higher refresh rate, 144 hertz, and OnePlus.
Yay.
I know. It's I notice these things. I know you don't.
That'll feel great when your app's taking ages to load because it's slow as hell. I'm joking. Do you know what's interesting though? It does look like a nice piece of hardware, but instantly put off by the fact that I don't know how to use that ecosystem.
Yeah, it's not hard. I mean, these
days...
I'm
sure it's not. I'm sure I get my head around it, but I don't know. It's a bit like seeing a Windows laptop and then seeing the Windows itself boot up and then going, oh,
yeah,
got to use Windows. I'm not a massive fan of, but this is me being an Uber fanboy, isn't it? So
I definitely. I think this is a really strong option for anyone who's looking for kind of a mid-range iPad, not the super premium, but pretty close to some of the premium features. And you're in the Android space already. This is kind of a really strong option. As I say, I mean, 144 hertz. What was I going to say about that? I had a point to make.
I think you made it. It's a higher refresh rate than the iPad now. Was that
yes, sorry. And the other thing I was going to say is it's got horizontal camera, which, not going to lie, I love that feature.
I do get annoyed with the iPad being, the camera being where it is for things like FaceTime calls. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But I guess it's the form factor and it differentiates it from the MacBook.
Mm-hmm.
I guess they'd say if you want, landscape as your primary viewing method, then
which is I think most tablets.
Are they? I don't know.
For video calls, definitely.
Yes, possibly, but I guess it depends, doesn't it? I think we forget that as techies who've been around computers for God knows how long and have very naturally leaned towards landscape. I typically view most devices where I've got a choice in landscape.
Mm.
A lot of people now haven't grown up that way, haven't grown up with PCs and computers in that way. Yeah. And actually,
portrait is the way forward for a lot of
their phone. Yeah, like if you think about what's popular now in terms of video, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Instagram. The amount of people who don't turn their phone when they're recording video on their phone drives me around the bend, because I think, well, how usable is that footage going to be? But that's my brain again leaning towards a more traditional format of video, where they might be recording something that they only intend to share with friends or view on their phone or share on TikTok. So I don't know. I would have thought, and maybe I'm giving Apple too much credit here, that they've done some research to work out how people... what's the majority form factor of their iPad? Because it would take presumably relatively small amount of effort to reposition the camera if that was the optimal place to put it for a general use. But is there a reason why it is where it is?
There is a reason. Especially on the ones that support the Apple Pencil. It's because that's where the technology to charge and magnetically attach.
But they could move that to the top where the camera is. They could switch them easy enough. Just magnets.
Yeah, there's definitely a reason that they wouldn't do that, because that would fall off a lot easier than I think if it was on the side.
Why?
And also, it's quite...
How is that different? How is it any different that it's on the side than the top?
Maybe you're right.
It's still magnetized. I don't know. I mean, I'm just saying it's guesswork. And perhaps on smaller iPads, in fact, the pencil's maybe longer than...
Yeah, I think that's probably it.
But I would have thought, given the amount of time that camera's been where it is, and the amount of times that what you said has probably been said, that if the majority of people use their iPad like we do, they'd have moved it. Well, or maybe, again, it's to keep you MacBooking. I don't know.
Not to blow your mind, Jay, but the iPad 10th generation does have a landscape camera, and they love it so much that they've got it in their comparison against their other iPad lineup.
No.
So it is the future.
That's not in the Pro.
I know.
But they've got it in an existing... I didn't know that.
Blew your mind, eh?
It has blown my mind, genuinely.
And I think this has... Actually, what I will say is it does have Apple Pencil support, but it's Gen 1 Apple Pencil, the one that you have to plug in, not the one that would charge at the kind of attached to it. So maybe that's how they fit it in.
Maybe you're right then.
Yeah, I do think that's the future. I think that's where most people are going. As
the way I use my iPad, it's way more often in landscape than it's ever in portrait because I have it in the Magic Keyboard case.
Yeah,
I don't have any reason to undock it, and mess around.
Yeah,
so maybe that's where it goes, and it would make more sense. Although again, I don't really FaceTime on my iPad sparingly, but when I do, I notice the weird disconnect of where the camera is.
Yeah, it does feel a bit weird. But there you go. Not on the OnePlus Pad. You have the horizontal camera, and we just touched on it before.
I'm gonna go and buy one now. I'm gonna sell this piece
just to test. Yeah, just to test the features. Sure. But the accessories as well. Yeah. So we mentioned it before. They've got a OnePlus Stylo that looks remarkably similar to the iPad, the pencil, the Apple Pencil, and also the magnetic keyboard. I had to stop myself there because as you read the OnePlus magnetic keyboard, you want to say Magic Keyboard.
I nearly did the same thing when I was talking about it a moment ago.
Which, now, it doesn't float like the Magic Keyboard, and I think that was actually one of the complaints that some of the reviewers had, is that in the marketing images, it looked like it did float above the keyboard, but it doesn't, as far as I know anyway. That was one of kind of the complaints. But still a solid keyboard as far as I hear. But yeah.
Like I said, looks decent. I don't know how much extra the keyboard was, or the pencil. Didn't notice that, or the pen.
Good question. I think I had that in the other.
It did offer you them on the Buy Me page.
134 for the keyboard, and
that's more reasonable than Apple.
69 for 69.30 for the.
69's around the same price as the Gen 1 Apple Pencil now, I think.
Yeah,
I think it's about that, isn't it? And the newest one's 100.
I think it charges in a bit of a better way, though. We'll see.
What, than the Apple Pencil?
The Gen 1 one, yeah.
Oh, Gen 1 was awful. Gen 1 was just... Gen 1 will go into the history books as one of Apple's worst sort of design cock-ups from a hardware perspective. Probably sat behind the bloody awful USB charging mouse that
I was just about to say, the Magic Mouse. That's definitely the worst.
You have to turn it on its side to charge. Yeah, that's ridiculous. But
I was just trying to find out though, because I think it is true. So what's even worse is, so the iPad 10th generation has support for the Gen 1 Apple Pencil, but it's got a Type-C connector. So you have to buy a Lightning to Type-C converter to charge your Apple Pencil with your iPad. I mean, come on.
I'm not defending it, but I was under the impression we were supposed to be talking about Android on this podcast.
Yeah, well, we were doing the pros and cons as well.
Stop bashing Apple and pretending you're not about to buy yet more Apple products.
Anyway, so
deceive our listeners.
I've got to fight both sides. The next one I had on the list was the recently launched Google Pixel tablet.
Now, is this the one that comes with the funky dock?
It is. It is.
I like this.
I think it's a really good idea.
I genuinely thought, that might be a reason to get rid of my Alexa devices.
Yeah. Whisper that one.
Try not to trigger anybody's devices at home or my own. But yeah, I like this one.
I think this is a really cool idea, and again, this is the feature I was speaking about before, which I can see Apple adopting this feature at some point. For those who can't see what I'm sharing on my screen, Google released this tablet so Google also own Nest, and Google Home, and the kind of smart products, and they have a very similar product to a tablet that's attached to a permanent dock with a speaker in. And so I think they thought, well, we're already making these screens with all these different features, kind of tablet-like. Why don't we make a tablet that attaches and detaches from a dock? And when it's attached to the dock, you can use it as a smart display, smart speaker, as if you would with your Alexa or Google Home or whatever you. But you can also detach it and use it as your tablet around the house or wherever as well. It's a really smart idea, and Apple released something in their WWDC for the next iPhone update, which is a nightstand mode when it's connected to MagSafe. So when you hanging on the magnet, it looks like a clock, and I think you can swipe it along, and it looks almost like a smart screen as well. So I think they're not far away from implementing this for iPads as well. They'd have to figure out some kind of magnet thing for it to attach for stuff like this. But a really clever idea. You, instead of getting a smart screen and speaker, you get a tablet and a smart screen speaker.
They're not a million miles off having the required connectivity for that.
Yeah.
Because most of the iPads now have got that 3-pin charging capability.
Yeah.
Sorry. And the magnetic case that attaches to your iPad Pro right now, well, you don't have it, but I've got the Magic Pro Magic Keyboard thing.
Yeah.
That snaps on with magnets. So there must be something in the iPad as well as the dock that's bringing that together.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that's purely magnets in the smart case.
Yeah, it'll be the connectors as well, the pins at the back and all of it together.
So
there's tons of magnets on the back.
To some degree, they've got that. Like you said, a MagSafe on the phones is not a million miles off what they'd probably need to do on the iPad. But
yeah.
And then you've got your HomePod Minis, which in themselves are sort of circa £100. And I have to say, I use mine a lot, and I love the kind of. I saw a video on this, which was the contact sharing. Is it Name Drop, which is coming to iOS 17, and they've created this real sort of magical feel as that share happens. So when you hold the two phones together, have you seen this?
Yeah, it starts to flash and buzz and stuff.
It sort of flashes and then pulses and kind of moves like an energy pulse, kind of moves between the devices in sync. I think that's just really, it's pretty completely nerdy, unnecessary, but it's completely aesthetically pleasing. It gives you a feeling that something physical has happened, even though it hasn't. HomePod has something similar, which is when you're playing music and you take your device near the HomePod kind of like HomePod pulses, the light pulses, and your phone vibrates to say, I've detected something. And I wouldn't be surprised if iOS 17 has a similar animation which sends your music into the HomePod from your phone. But, if you brought the HomePod and that dock technology together, as you said, you've got what Google are trying to do here.
Yeah.
But they've already done it.
They have already done it.
Looks really good.
And the other issue, I think, with Apple's implementation is you have to deal with Siri. Just put that out there. Whereas, Google Assistant is,
I haven't used Google
ahead.
Assistant, but just having Amazon's alternative and Apple in the house, I find the Amazon device tends to be much more reliable. Siri is questionable in terms of even 100%. Simple commands like, I won't say the full command, but Siri, like play my favorites playlist.
Yeah.
And I've tried this multiple times, and she just keeps trying to play an Ed Sheeran track. Got no idea why. Doesn't even sound like my favorites playlist, but it keeps playing this Ed Sheeran track, and it's not. I don't even know what this song is. I've never liked it, added it to a playlist. It's really weird.
Siri is honestly
they're not
terrible. Terrible.
Yeah.
But so Google's offering here, I mean, there's a few other things that we can chat about. Google have started to develop their own chips for their phone. So I think it's the same chip that they developed for their phones that is in this one. So the Google Tensor G2 is in this, which again, Google are not like the premium brand, so it's kind of middle of the road in terms of performance. So I wouldn't expect to have amazing performance of this tablet, but it's a fairly solid tablet for what it is. What I really like about it is the dock comes in the box with it when you buy it, which Apple would definitely not do, and it would probably charge you quite a considerable premium for buying it. So
it's
rare these days.
As well, can't you?
You can, so you can have a couple around the house, which is quite useful. And I think it's like £130 or something for the dock. So the fact they're including that with the tablet must be, the cost. It's fairly
so price-wise,
reasonable.
It comes in 2 storage sizes and 2 colors. Those are the only things you can change.
Yeah.
It's 128 gig or 256, and it's $599 or $699.
Yeah.
So if you take £130-ish worth of dock out of the equation, you're looking at what, $470?
Yeah.
So less than the OnePlus.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good price.
Yeah.
And in a world of streaming, and I always think with tablets, like large hard drives are somewhat unnecessary. 128 gig would probably do you.
Yeah.
for what they're trying to pitch this as. You'd stream most entertainment, and this is going to be docked, providing you with browsing and home controls, things like that. None of which really requires a huge amount of storage. So you're not going to be taking loads of pictures on this, I wouldn't have thought.
No.
So yeah, I really like this one, and I did wonder what you were going to include when you proposed this episode.
Yeah.
And I thought OnePlus was interesting, but this is the one I was hoping you would have put in. And,
yeah.
I like it.
The only other thing to mention about this is Google has quite a good ecosystem, not just with their phones, but they do have smartwatches and earbuds, but also they own a lot of other products. Like we mentioned Nest before. There's other things that they own that can integrate quite well with this, especially in the smart home space. So in terms of the ecosystem, it is actually, I think, quite there with this.
I've definitely contemplated Google as the home assistant. And we're an Alexa house at the moment. That was just because they were being so affordable, and we had a couple, and then we bought a few couple more, and then eventually we ended up with one in every room. But I'm also a Nest home, so I've got a number of Nest cameras and Nest thermostat. You can interact with it with the Amazon alternative, but there are certain things, simple things, that it can't do. So I've got the doorbell, but the way that Amazon sees the doorbell is purely as a camera, so I can't use it to play doorbell notifications or communicate with the front door like I could do with a Ring device, or if I had Google Home instead.
Yeah.
So the fact that I've got these two disconnected brands trying to come together means that I'm losing functionality. So I did contemplate. Well, I don't think some, maybe one, and a couple of the Google Docs to get. Even just the what are the Google Minis? Is that what they're called? The little alternative to the Echo Dots.
Yeah, they've got a couple of them, I think.
That would probably be sufficient for our house, but then I'd have to rip out 7 or 8 Amazon devices in total from around the home and replace them. So that's quite an expense, to be honest.
Yeah, Nest Mini.
Probably won't do it, but yeah.
That's cheap, £49 for Nest Mini as well. I mean,
Amazon
are. The thing with Amazon is that
£400 to replace
if you use Prime, if you use Amazon to buy anything, just from sheer exposure alone, it's going to be easier to get the Amazon devices, just because you see it all the time and you see all the sales. Whereas you have to really know what you're looking for if you're going to go out with the Nest ones. You have to look for it yourself. You have to Google it.
Yeah,
ironically.
I would definitely pick one of these up. Even being an Apple family, I think one of those could be quite compelling, just as like a home media center. I would like that to control the music around my home, where it's playing. See the cameras, view the doorbell. I think that perhaps in the dining room or the living room would be a really great solution. I like it. I could see myself buying that, even as the Apple fanboy you know me to be.
Yeah.
There you go. Because I think it adds value to my home setup.
Yeah.
Rather than my personal setup, which are two quite different things.
Yeah. It's a good way to worm into somebody's ecosystem, is that if you're already using bits of one, then you get both devices with it. So clever. Yeah, so there you go. Mission accomplished. Already convinced Jay. Okay, so the last one I've got on the list is Samsung. And
you won't
Samsung,
get me here.
No, I imagine not.
I've just seen the price.
Yeah, these are, well, it's in the top right. If you're watching on YouTube, it's 1,000. It starts at 1,039. But we're in the ultra territory here. So there's a few different devices you can get. I think that might be the ultra, but I could be wrong. So these are definitely high-end premium.
It is the ultra. So that is the lower end of the ultra. That's just really quickly, 128 gig. You can have 256 for, if the website refreshes, that's small, 1,139. So not a big jump. You want to double that again, you can have 512 for 1,289. So that appears to be the only thing you can change in terms of configuration. So that would be the most expensive, which still puts it considerably less than the highest end iPad, even if it's slightly underpowered.
Yes. Well, what's crazy about that, and I was going to get onto it because there's 3 different tablets on this page that I'm going to share. There's the S8. S8 is the generation, but they have other tablets as well on the cheaper side as part of their offering, Samsung's offering. But on the S line, that tends to be the top of the line. S8, S8 Plus. The difference between those two, exactly the same hardware, as far as I know, but also a bigger screen with the Plus. And then the S8 Ultra is a bit of a ridiculous device, I think. It's a 15-inch screen, I think it is. It's a huge tablet. Huge.
Yeah, 14.6. Interestingly, I don't know what the price differences are. I can have a look in a second, perhaps. But in terms of the at-a-glance comparison, there's not a lot difference between the Ultra. You've got a slightly improved battery, size-wise, 11,200 milliamps as opposed to 10,090. And then the smaller one of all 3 is only 8,000. Screen size is the only noticeable difference that they've called out, weirdly. Same processor, same camera, same on-screen fingerprint scanner. Except for the smallest one, which has fingerprint scanner on the power key.
Yeah.
Which is slightly strange. So there's some very unusual kind of differences, but actually there's not a massive amount in it. And price-wise, just looking at this now, the Tab S8 without 5G is 669, so a little, maybe slightly more.
That might actually be the cheaper offering, because I'm just looking here at the screen technology. The 11-inch is LCD, whereas the 12.4-inch and the 14.6 are AMOLED. So I think the way that they're positioning these tablets is the 11-inch is the more budget offering. I mean, it's still expensive. It's 600 or so pounds.
Well, you say that, but it's not that much more than the Google we've just looked at, and only a small jump up from the OnePlus. So if you're in the Samsung ecosystem,
again, a no-brainer.
You're probably going to want to stay in it. You can get into it for 669, and it's what was the screen size on that one again? Was it 11 inches?
11-inch, yeah.
That's quite sizable still, isn't it? I think I'm trying to think what the iPad Mini was. Was it something like 7 or 8 inches?
Yeah. So the iPad Pro comes in 11-inch offering as well.
Yeah. So I was going to say, so 11-inch really is your average iPad.
Yeah.
Which is because there is rumor as well, isn't there, that there's an iPad Ultra on the way.
I think it's
might be bigger again.
I have heard that. I've heard that the next one is going to be similar to this Galaxy Tab S8 Ultra, which is 14.6 inches, somewhere close to the 15-inch mark, which for a tablet is...
Which, it's big, obscene. But if you're...
I mean, we've got the 12.9-inch one, and I think it's bordering on too big.
Well, it's interesting because I had the original iPad Pro, which my wife now uses, and I still think that looks massive. Even though when they're together, there's not much in it, but because the bezel's been brought in on the iPad Pro that we've now got, there's not as much in it. I think, though, this isn't aimed at your everyday user. I would have thought if Apple go down that route, and don't know how Samsung position theirs, there's a lot of artists and sort of designers that use iPads, and actually a 15-inch tablet is pretty comparable to what a lot of people have at home, in terms of Wacom devices for graphical inputs. So actually, you're not compromising on screen size for your art if you're using a 15-inch tablet, and you've got all the benefits of mobility and all the other things that tablet can do, which a chunky Wacom device can't do without being plugged into a relevant device. So I could see it being an attractive prospect.
It's funny you mention that, actually, because one of the benefits of the Samsung tablets over Apple is that the pen comes with it. The stylus comes with it, and it's, as far as I know, the technology is comparable with the technology that you get in the Apple Pencil as well. So, I mean, if you knock off £120, which is what it costs for the Apple Pencil.
The pen comes with all of these, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's interesting. The Yeah, I was just looking at the difference in some of these devices. It's not a bad price point. I mean, you won't see a 15-inch iPad for £1,000. Not on your
Oh
life.
God, no. God,
Not
no.
on your life. So, yeah, if you're comparing apples with apples or apples with Samsung, then yeah, you're
See
gonna
what you did
gonna
there.
get much more bang. Thanks, much more bang for your buck with Samsung.
Yeah, definitely. And they've got a lot leaning into their ecosystem as well on this page as well. So I think if you're in the Samsung world, these are definitely worth considering just because they're going to work so well with your current devices. And actually the technology is really good. Before I moved over to Apple, my thought process was I wanted to select an ecosystem basically, and I knew I wanted a tablet. One of the components, there's many reasons why I decided to switch, is that I compared these tablets to Apple tablets, and I knew that I really wanted an Apple tablet, and the only way it was going to work for me if I was in that ecosystem. And then my phone died, and I decided to make the move around then. In comparing them, I noticed that the screens are great, like really, really good, but they're not as bright as I expected. They're actually much more dim than I expected they would be. So that's something to consider
on the
on these
Samsungs.
tablets. Yeah. And I think it was the S8 that I was looking at as well, because I can't remember when these were announced, but I think it might have been last year. So they're probably due an upgrade soon, to be honest. But I remember that the screens weren't as bright as they are on iPads, and I did wonder whether I would struggle to use it outdoors. I mean, I still struggle sometimes now with this iPad, and it's an incredibly bright screen. It gets up to 1,000 nits or something because of the mini OLEDs that it's got, but the mini LEDs even. But that's something to consider as well. If you can go to a store and compare them, that's the best way to do it. There are Samsung stores now, which again, there wasn't, say, a few years ago, and they're really leaning into the opposition for Apple.
Difficult though. Going to either one of those flagship stores is it doesn't really help you, because what you want is those two things side by side. So you're almost better going to like an independent retailer, like a Currys, that sells both, because at least you can see the two devices next to each other in the same lighting, same conditions. Because that's the other thing, isn't it? Apple's store, and I'm sure Samsung, and just the same. The lighting is geared a certain way. The environment is set up to make the best of their devices. Currys, frankly, don't put that much effort in. So when you go into Currys, they're just slapped on a shelf like everything else they sell. But at least you're getting consistency in the environments in which you're interacting with them. And I absolutely agree that you should definitely do research before investing in these devices and take the time to compare them appropriately and decide what you need. You can also get lost in the hardware comparisons. And I think you mentioned this before, actually, in favor of Apple. So I'm going to call you out for being a secret Apple fanboy. I'm joking. The fact that Apple works so hard to optimize their software and hardware together to get the most out of, say, the battery life, for example.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that Samsung don't do that, but those sorts of things are worth considering, because just because it's got a particular processor or a certain amount of RAM or whatever doesn't necessarily mean that the overall package is better. You've got to weigh that up against the software, the apps that you're looking for. All of those things are important when considering this kind of investment.
Yeah, 100%. Lots to compare against, I think. It is a tough decision to make if you're between the two ecosystems. So, I mean, I hope this video helped for anyone who's watching make that decision. There's a lot more on offer now than there was 10 years ago when I was using my Android tablet. So it's only good for consumers to have this much choice, but it's also a 100%. Bit of a minefield. They push competition between them.
I not just because of the conversation we've had on this episode, but I had genuinely looked at that Google tablet and phone and thought, yeah, I could go to that.
I might take that as a win for today then. All right.
Yeah, fair enough.
Cool. Well, we'll leave it there. That's all for today's episode. Thanks for hanging out with us. And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on all podcast services, so you don't miss an episode as well. And, announcement, we've moved from Twitch and we're starting to live stream our gaming on YouTube now. So keep your eyes peeled for that, for the YouTube streams. where we'll be doing a variety of games, usually on a Sunday night. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.